Hello lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, welcome back to another video. Today's game might be a little bit controversial as it scored okay with critics, but in general it wasn't particularly loved by fans, and that is Far Cry 6. It's not hated just because it's from arguably the most hated publisher outside of EA, Ubisoft, but the game released at a time when Ubisoft was struggling with its fans. It had a few kind of subpar releases from its major franchises, such as Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Watch Dogs Legion, and Far Cry New Dawn. And if you want, I'll do a video on that. But enough about Ubisoft and their issues. Let's dive into Far Cry 6 and see if it deserves the low user scores. As we always do with this show, let's start with the good. Now, it will come as no shock, but obviously Far Cry 6 is a very pretty game. Visually, it lives up to what the series is probably most well known for. Luscious and dense fauna, incredibly vast views, and the ability to go just about anywhere. It's everything I would expect, and I can't complain. I won't say that Yara is my absolute favourite fictional Far Cry land, but it's definitely up there for me. Exploration in general is also a big plus in this game, thanks to those great visuals and the fact that there's always a lot for you to do, but more on some of those things later, because it's not always a good thing. The voice acting throughout is really well done, and I do think everyone does a really believable job of their role. However, I will say there is a little bit of lip syncing issues that makes things feel a little stiff. It's a little bit jarring to see, but it's typically only happening during cutscenes, and it's not that big a deal. Also, I gotta say the performance of the game was surprisingly good. Being an open world game, and from Ubisoft, I honestly expected there to be a lot more bugs. Now, there definitely were some, but nothing that was really that bad. There was just minor things, and overall the game ran better than I expected. I actually had less issues with this than I did with 5. Another good point for me is the amount of options the game gives you to do just about anything. By that, I mean, if you want to explore, you can walk, ride a horse, drive, either a car or a boat. You can also fly. What about combat? Well, you have a 3-weapon loadout, with a 4th weapon being a secondary, along with a special attack that you can use and swap out based on your needs, and this is called the Supremo Backpack. Early on, it's your best friend for taking out specific enemies such as helicopters and tanks. However, once you get a little further into the game and you unlock some of those stronger weapons, you don't really need to rely on it as much, allowing you to go for a more interesting approach to every combat situation. In order to make the most of the combat, you're going to need to use a mix of special and regular weapons that you'll find throughout Yara. Special weapons come with predetermined attachments and bonuses, while the regular ones allow for full customization. You won't be going too crazy with the upgrades as they're attempting to be a little bit more grounded, but they are still quite strong and they allow for a lot of variation. Each of these upgrades come with their pros and cons, like the silencers, so you really need to figure out what your playstyle is and make sure your upgrades match that. The last major good point for me is the amigo system. Although I never really used it all too much in my own playing time, the option to have an animal companion show up and help out during a fight was honestly a godsend at points, because you can easily get overwhelmed. Compared to previous titles, 6, although not the hardest, will definitely challenge you, because, at least to me, it feels like it's the game that makes you die the easiest out of the entire series, ignoring the first game. Far Cry 6 is also full of nice little touches, such as being able to pet all the animals, as well as if you swim across a river, having the current push you downstream. The game has a lot of love put into it by those who worked on it, and it does show. It just sucks that Ubisoft are the ones behind this game, but more on that later. Moving into the just okay parts of the game, this is where I'll place the game's story. It has its moments where it's good, but ultimately it does balance out to being somewhere slightly above average, but not good enough to be good, if that makes sense. If someone said they really enjoyed it, I could accept it, just as much as if someone said that they hated it. The main issue for me is that the pacing of the story is pretty bad. It's hurt because of the amount of things you have to do in the game. But again, more on this later. It means in order to get good pacing, you need to ignore pretty much everything that isn't a main mission, which then hurts because due to the different level zones throughout Yara, enemies just become tougher without there really being a way for you to catch up. So you need to slow down and do everything else. It's technically nothing new in terms of Far Cry, but it feels a bit more substantial here. And by that, I mean the upgrades are definitely more important. Don't get me wrong, you can slug it out with the beginner weapons. However, it's going to take more and more shots to take out harder and harder enemies, and as soon as you start getting multiple tanks or helicopters, forget about it. Normally I am one to praise the sound in a game, as I think it's often overlooked, and I will say the soundscape in Far Cry 6 isn't that bad, but it felt a little bit lackluster. Now, in fairness, this could be because of other games I was playing around the time of playing this for the video, but it either felt like some things were too much or not enough when it came to the audio. I will say it still has plenty of good audio design throughout, but the overall experience isn't the best it could have been. A good example is the vehicles. Like, they just sound too loud at any given point. And it didn't really matter what I set the audio sliders to, it was just a bit too much. It might just be a me thing though. The gear you also unlock throughout the game is just an okay point for me, though the series has had its fair share of cool costumes and unlockables. And even though the ones in this game are definitely suitable, I'm not a big fan of the star rating system. Essentially, every piece of gear you can obtain will have a star level indicating how useful it is. Now, it doesn't mean a 1-star item is completely useless altogether, but it does mean you're going to naturally lean towards higher ranked pieces of gear, which means you're forced into the specific bonuses that gives. This goes for both armor and guns. I think a better system would have been to have weapons and gear that you can level up by using, ultimately allowing you to create your playstyle. However, here, the star system sort of forces you to play the way the game wants you to play, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. It's definitely functional by all means, and it doesn't ruin the experience, but I just would have liked a little bit more freedom here. The last main okay point for me is the enemies and their variety, which on paper should be a good thing, and don't get me wrong, I do appreciate it, but ultimately while you're out and about, they don't really feel all too different from one another. The only time you'll really notice the difference is when you are being swarmed by them, and that's because there's so many of them, they actually have a chance for them to show those different attacks. Also, I know it's core to the overall experience, but I'm just over getting attacked by wild animals while trying to do absolutely anything. Now for the bad. I've hinted at it a couple times already, but the amount of side activities and collectathon-like elements this game has is honestly too much. You'll be driving to the next mission, and on your minimap, there's like 20 different icons. It's either gear to collect, crafting materials, enemies holding someone hostage, minigames, supply drops, checkpoints, anti-aircraft guns, and the list goes on. It's the biggest issue with Far Cry 6 for me. Unfortunately, it makes Far Cry 6 nothing more than busy work. It ultimately bogs down the entire experience, because at its core, Far Cry 6 is definitely more than competent. It's a very solid game. As I said before, the people who have worked on it clearly care about what they're doing. However, Ubisoft's business decisions have destroyed what could have been something special. Just take the fact that there's a rotating shop that requires a special currency because they want you to spend real life money in a single player game. Don't get me wrong, you can play co-op, but ultimately this is meant to be a single player experience. And don't get me wrong, yes, you can earn this currency in game, but you earn it at such a slow rate and you have to do basically the same missions over and over again that it becomes an exercise in futility. It's so mundane. And honestly, I think that's the plan. That's how they want to get the money out of you. You could argue that you don't necessarily need these items, and I think that's a fair argument to make. However, thanks to the star rating system, you might legitimately need some of these weapons at certain points. At the end of the day, I think the game would have just benefited from a less is more approach. It's just got too much going on. It's honestly been overdeveloped. Sadly, this is a core feature of basically every Ubisoft game. Take Assassin's Creed Valhalla, a perfectly fine game, ruined by bloat and overdevelopment. I played through the entire series of Far Cry not too long ago with the exception of 6 at the time, and I can say with the more modern titles in the series, basically 3 onward, it progressively gets worse with this. Yet none of them, with the exception of Primal, have felt unique to themselves. With the exception of locations, nothing's really changed. If you said 6 was basically a remake or DLC for 3, I honestly could believe it. The game unfortunately never manages to push the actual series forward, and yes, you can have a great time with it, and I think it is a solid game for what it is, but sadly it's stale. Like Ubisoft itself, Far Cry has failed to evolve in any meaningful way, and I don't think it's the fault of the people who worked on the game. I think it's the suits at the top that are pulling the strings. They only care about investors, not the product. I really don't want this series to fail. It's one of my all-time favorites, but if we do ever get a Far Cry 7, please do something different. Go back to 2 and use the mechanics like medication for malaria. Have some actual survival elements to it. Maybe build up a single home base, train a rebel force, and do things to conquer the land from there, so you can focus on main missions instead of having to do all this side crap. Just breathe some fresh air into this lifeless franchise. Because sadly, if you play any Far Cry game from 3 onward, you've played them all. Except for Primal. That game is great. So with that, lads, ladies, gents, ladetts, whoever, whatever, it brings us to the end of another video. I hope you enjoyed this look at Far Cry 6, and I do apologise if I got a little ranty at the end there. I do think ultimately it is a decent game, and I think that the developers who worked on it put a lot of effort in, and it does show. However, sadly, Ubisoft, being the company they are, have ruined the experience that could have been. If you like the game, let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting that like button. If you want to go that extra step, you can hit the subscribe button. And if you want to go that extra mile, you can support me on Ko-fi, Patreon, or YouTube memberships like these lovely people here. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe out there. Bye.